A space for conversation around women's health through the lens of naturopathic and Eastern medicine. I am Sandy Ross, and this is Her Earth Medicine Podcast. This podcast is multi-leveled. Episodes for patient education to graduate practitioner level. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you gain value from this episode. Thanks for joining us once again, Geoff. We really enjoyed your conversation last time on adaptogens, so it's such a pleasure to have you back here.
It's great to be back. Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself for those who haven't heard about your amazing journey with herbs?
Okay, well, I was trained by a third-generation herbalist, Cathy Dunn, and her then husband, Neville, in Western Australia. I graduated 36 years ago, which I just looked up the other day. And I have them to thank for instilling in me an attitude of needing to go into the root cause of illness. Not just treat the symptoms, which is pretty much how things are done mostly today. I'm very passionate about herbal medicine because it is much more, it has a greater breadth and ability to go deep within the system, which nutritional medicine's important, but it doesn't always go to the root causes. I'm a cancer survivor twice. And because of that, my primary interests are integrative oncology and endothelial health, which is the endothelial health because it's one of the major consequences of damage done by Western medicine in its treatment of cancer. So that got me into going deep into this subject.
Great. Okay. So a great segue into what we're going to be discussing, which is microcirculation. And it's one of those things that I suppose I had heard of, but not in depth on how to use it or how to apply the herbal medicine to it. And it's one of those things that I've loved being educated by you in the last couple of years on herbal medicine that you've really brought me back into. So today's topic, we are going to be talking about microcirculation. So can we start by going into what is the role of the microcirculation system and why aren't we talking about it?
Okay, so we have 150 or 60,000 kilometres of blood vessels in our bodies. About 25% are the blood vessels that most of us know about, that is arteries and veins. They have muscles and they have different types of walls. The rest are capillaries, and they have a lining of 1 cell thick. Now, and they are endothelial cells, but they line the entire circulatory system and a lot of other things as well, but particularly the whole circulatory system, including the heart. But also the lungs, the gut, your skin is endothelial cells. It is right through the system, but it is extremely important in the circulatory system because other than that 25%, it's 1 cell thick. Very, very thin, and this is the reason it is so important.
I find that's a great conversation when discussing with patients about the gut, just drawing a little picture about the endothelium cell wall and just showing them it's a cell wall thick.
Yep. It is amazing, and it is not dealt with today in natural medicine, basically because about 60 or 70 years ago, Western medicine basically made it illegal for anybody but Western medicine to treat the heart and circulation. And so basically we avoided it. However, Western medicine cannot treat and has no treatment at all for endothelial dysfunction. And that's primarily what we're going to be talking about today, how to treat endothelial dysfunction. So there is no Western drug, no Western trick to treating it. There are a couple of machines, but they're not in common use. But we'll talk about those a little bit later. but essentially that one cell thick for the majority of your circulation is what is between us and disaster. That is strokes, for example, which are a major killer, but all cardiovascular disease starts at the endothelium. But also a lot of other ill health. We'll go through those a bit further along when we get into discussing details. But the circulation feeds, supplies nutrition to, supplies oxygen to, and removes wastes from and excessive water from everywhere. And it's also responsible for transporting, instructing neurotransmitters and many other things through our system to give instruction to all the cells. So if it's not functioning well, we get lots of problems. Okay, so, and capillaries, they are the smallest blood vessel in our body. And if we have a look in somebody's eyes, you can see them. All those little red lines, they are capillaries. But there's millions of them all over the body. As I said, 150, 160,000 kilometres. Only 25% are what we recognise as the veins and arteries. The rest are these tiny little blood vessels. So, and they're very important. So that's what we're going to be talking about. So what they do is they take nutrition in, oxygen in, water in, remove wastes, carbon dioxide out, and mineral wastes. So it's a very important system. When it starts going out of normal function, we get the most common thing we would see is probably blood pressure problems. So we'll talk about what causes that a little bit later when we get a bit further in, but it's incredibly important.
Okay, so can we dive into what are endothelial cells and what's their role in the body?
Okay, so what are endothelial cells and how do they work and what are their types? Okay, so they line the entire body, and they all of the capillaries is one cell thick. They're capillary cells. They're very fine. They go right throughout the system. They're very flat cells, and they are joined tightly to each other, with a couple of exceptions. They are selectively permeable. Of course, they have to be to let fluids out, nutrition out, oxygen out, and allow things back in. So that's very specific how they work. So there are three types of capillaries. The first one's continuous, and they are basically tightly joined together, and they only allow water and ions to diffuse through the tight junctions of where they join up. And other than that, they are basically a continuous lining. Then there are the next one is a fenestrated capillary or endothelial cell. They have very tiny little holes in them. So have you ever heard the term fenestrate? Or there used to be a joke about Wall Street when the Depression occurred, that the traders, when they had a disastrous loss, would defenestrate. That is, they jump out the window. Mm-hmm. So in other words, it means there's windows. It's a French word, which means there are windows in the endothelial cells. And this is to allow more material in and out. So they're in very specific places to allow this greater transition of material in and out of the blood vessel. And finally, there are sinusoidal, and these are perhaps the most interesting. They have even bigger holes in them, and these will actually allow red blood cells out. So these are in specialised areas like the liver and spleen, because, for example, in the liver, the red cells need to be cleaned discharge their waste, and then they go back in again. And if you are let's talk about what's happened when things go wrong. So normally those endothelial cells should be tight. They should be quite thin. They should be slippery, and they should be flexible. So because in the very tiny blood vessels, such as going into the kidney, it's big enough for literally one red cell to slide through when it's been elongated. So it looks a bit like a cigar instead of our nice round red cell. They elongate into this cigar shape because the little blood vessels are so small that that's the only way they can get down them. So first of all, your red cells have to be healthy, and we'll talk about that a bit further along. But the endothelial cells have to be healthy, so because they need to flex to allow that red cell down. They have to be slippery to allow the red cell to slide along, or white cell. Both of these cells have to be also be able to be flexible to get down there. So what happens when the endothelium becomes unhealthy? First of all, the gaps start failing. So instead of having nice tight gaps, in inappropriate places, the gaps become too wide, and so particularly fluids leak into tissue that shouldn't be there. And, extreme cases of this are lymphedema, but it happens in all sorts of places at low levels, and we don't realise what's happening. A lot of people who carry a lot of fluid, as they see as weight, it's actually fluid because the endothelium's in poor health.
So is this happening in the gut with intestinal hyperpermeability?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. I'm sure every naturopath listening at the moment is going, leaky gut.
Absolutely. So, and look, if we go back a few hundred years to the physiomedicalists, they had a platform that said, and they were herbalists, so you can't heal an organ permanently unless you deal with the microcirculation. Sorry, they said circulation. Microcirculation is a modern term. They saw it that you just had to repair the circulation to that organ, otherwise whatever improvements you got wouldn't last. Makes perfect sense when you understand the microcirculation. They didn't. They had a much not as refined a view as we have today. So what happens when we get this increased permeability? We get more fluid and antimicrobial and chemicals leaching into the surrounding tissue, and of course we get bacteria and viruses able to access that as well. And we even get white blood cells getting out into places they shouldn't.
So inflammation.
Yes. So we get vasculitis, we get lymphoid problems, we get mineral imbalances because those fluids are not being exchanged properly. It even can affect bone. It can affect literally everything. We'll get into this in more detail as we go along. One of the things that most people don't think about with endothelial cells is the lymphatic areas. So the lymph system is lined with endothelial cells. Now they're not exactly the same as in the blood vessels, but they are the same type of cell, and they need the same type of nutrition. So, and when they begin to fail, we get lymphedema.
What is the nutrition?
We will get to that. Look, good nutrition underlies this, but to try and repair a damaged endothelium with just nutrition, it's a very long-term thing. So herbal medicine is much more efficient and quicker at it. Okay. So additionally to this, it's very important to have a healthy red cell population. So there's a couple of problems that occur to red blood cells and make this problem much worse. And the first one is called rouleau. And both rouleau and aggregation are the two main ones, and that's caused by the static charge that is on a red blood cell, which normally causes it to repel its neighbours, is reversed and they stick together. So rouleau is like a stack of coins sticking on top of one another, and aggregation is clumping.
So anyone that does live blood analysis will be going ding, ding, ding.
Absolutely. So you see this here. And, of course, in these tiny little blood vessels, none of these are going to be able to get down there. None of them. So, of course, what happened? These are two of the factors, but there are more factors in blood pressure. So we go back to if the endothelial cell's not functioning properly, it doesn't flex, it gets sticky, then red cells trying to go down won't go down. What happens is this causes a back pressure towards the heart, and so the heart says, I'm not getting oxygen and nutrition out to where I need to get it, so I'll start pumping harder, and so we get blood pressure as the result. And so Western medicine will say, we'll just cut the heart rate down without solving the cause. The cause is that the red cells are not getting, and all the fluids in the blood are not getting to where they need to get to create healthy tissue. So that's why the heart's going up. If we slow it down, they're still not getting there. So we're getting a drop in nutrition to the peripheral areas. We're getting a drop in oxygen. We're getting a drop in waste removal. And the obvious first thing that we see is rapid ageing.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
So, are you going to talk a bit more about the red blood cells before we go into the role of the repair mechanism?
Yes, I will. So the next. So I talked a little bit ago about the flexibility of the red blood cell. They have to go cigar shape, and there's been some very recent research about 3 years ago in the University of California, where they discovered the mechanism for the fluid membrane and how it works. And it looks like a geodesic dome, and they have uncovered the chemistry. So it's a protein called spectrin, and surprisingly, there's a herb that does treat this very well. In Western medicine doesn't know this, but there are some very good images you can find online. So if you just search the flexibility of red blood cells, there's some beautiful images that show you how it works, and it looks like a bunch of springs connecting some chemical structures. And these springs are very flexible and allow the red cell to actually go cigar-shaped. But as we age, this is what happens. They become rigid and won't go down these small blood vessels. So nutrition and the right sort of herbs and diet can change this.
Okay.
So you asked a little while ago about all the conditions that this affects. And look, pretty much everything. You know, the really big ones are hypertension, like we've already talked about, coronary artery disease, chronic heart failure, peripheral vascular disease, diabetes, chronic kidney failure, severe viral infections. So one of the things that gets significantly affected is the balance of nitrous oxide. And because nitrous oxide is manufactured in the endothelium, so one of the things that as people who are into men's health will notice, the first thing is erectile dysfunction, because it is directly relies upon nitrous oxide.
Yes.
So, and I know here on the Gold Coast that it's party town, and one of the things that a lot of the clinicians see is early erectile dysfunction, and it's because of party lifestyle. Drugs, alcohol, cigarettes.
All damaging the microcirculation.
All damaging the microcirculation. Okay. There's more that damages it. SAD, standard Australian diet, or standard American diet, as a lot of the literature says. Pollution, of course. And so you'll see this in heavily polluted areas as well. But all of those things have a significant impact on the endothelium. And it's not immediate. It's something that happens over years. Little kids, the majority, unless they have some other comorbidity, their endothelium's in wonderful condition.
Okay.
And this brings into a little thing on the side, we're talking about viruses and so on. Why aren't we seeing COVID in little kids? And I think this is the reason, that their endothelium is in very good condition. So, and there's a lot of other things around COVID as well to do with endothelium. It attacks the endothelium in the lungs to start off with, and causes a cascade of cytokines that attack the circulatory endothelium, and then we go into the serious consequences of COVID. So the endothelium is significantly involved in that, and I think, and it's still early days yet, but I am pretty sure that the reason we're not seeing it in kids is because the endothelium's in very good condition.
Cool. Okay, could you elaborate a little bit on the endothelium repair process?
Okay, so when we're young, we get as the Western medicine people call it, an inflammatory insult. So that can be caused by many, many different things. It damages the endothelial cells, and they slough off into the circulation, and replacement occurs by induced proliferation of the neighbouring endothelial cells. When a cell dies, the neighbouring ones quickly replace those cells. Now, of course, when we're young, that's not such a big problem. It happens very rapidly, but as we age, it becomes more and more of a problem. And as you can imagine, one cell thick lining of microcirculation in the brain, and you get an insult in one area, what's going to happen? If it can't reproduce those cells quickly enough, we get a bleed. And so we have a stroke. So, you're starting to see that this is a very, very important area of health. The key thing, though, is that the neighbouring cells divide. They're stimulated by the death of a neighbouring cell, and they divide and replace the ones close to them. The trick is reducing inflammation, and of course this is what naturopathy and natural medicine's all about. We know that inflammation drives so many diseases, and that Western diet and lifestyle causes high inflammation, and whether that's pollution or high excessive proteins and junk food and so on, any of those things that drive inflammation will affect the endothelium. So this is relatively recent in Western medicine's understanding, because they've actually been able to see this through video microscopy, and that they've actually gone in to have a look at this process of regeneration of the endothelium. But they also discovered in that process that, which wasn't known before, about the stickiness when they're unhealthy. So, which we've talked about. So the key things of a dysfunctioning endothelium is, first of all, they don't dilate properly. So if they don't dilate, they don't allow in the very small vessels the red blood cells to move along properly. They get sticky, which means, again, these red cells trying to go down in these tiny blood vessels get blocked. So they stick and cause back pressure. They leak inappropriately, so you get leakage of fluids and microbes and viruses and chemistry that shouldn't be in that area. Also that they don't produce the level of nitrous oxide that they're supposed to. So all of these things are going on as the quality of the endothelium deteriorates.
Okay. So, I mean, this is a very big missing piece to a lot of people's treatment, isn't it? And
yes.
I think a lot of that's, not that we're not treating it, but, you know, a lot of people are in women's health specifically, treating female conditions, or they're doing gut stuff. I mean, this is very relatable to gut health.
Yes.
But, you know, things like stroke, cardiovascular disease, it seems to be a thing that's diminishing a little bit as we come into specialties. But this is something that can be a very, very wide applied
absolutely
condition associated. But can you just, before we touch on the chronic conditions and go into the herbs, can you differentiate the difference between the microcirculation and the macrocirculation?
Okay, so the macrocirculation is the one that everybody knows about, the arteries and the veins. Mm-hmm. They have muscular or other tissue walls that actually pump the blood along or retain it. They make up about 25 to 30% of the entire circulation. So if you're talking 150,000 kilometres, they make up 50,000 kilometres, okay, or a little bit less. So 100,000 kilometres is one cell thick endothelial cells. So, and you know, if we actually visualise that, so let's get down to, so one of the first things that gets affected, and I think this is the reason why in TCM it's the most important organ, is or one of the reasons, is the kidney. So the kidney has around 1 to 1.3 million nephrons in it. And each nephron has a very tiny blood vessel going into it, taking the red cells and the fluids into the glomerulus. So it's very small to start off with. And so, as you can imagine, the size of a kidney, it's got 1.3 million of these nephrons in there. So you can imagine the size of the blood vessels, because there's a blood vessel supplying each one of those and a glomerulus. And so, you know, it's very, very, very tiny, which is why when the endothelium starts dysfunctioning, we start to see kidney problems.
Okay. So you already touched on a few conditions associated with the microcirculation, but can you maybe touch on a few other associated chronic conditions with microcirculation? Okay,
so diabetes is one that we, again, don't think about. Hypertension we've already talked about. Pretty much anything to do with the heart.
Okay.
Varicosities, of course. Hypothyroidism. So that's kind of interesting, you know. Again, if you think about it, if the nutrition to the thyroid's not great, if its supply of instructing chemistry is not able to be delivered in a timely manner, it's going to have a problem. Osteoporosis. The big three that we all know about as the consequence of diabetes are neuropathy, nephropathy and retinopathy, all to do with microcirculation. Another obvious one are the brain ones, Alzheimer's and dementia, and ageing of all types. But getting broader, something like kidney function, liver function is an interesting one. We talked about the type of endothelial cell that allowed more that allowed red cells to come out. So in the liver, the red cells actually come out of the circulatory system and are allowed to disgorge their wastes and fats and so on at the liver. Now, what happens when these endothelial cells swell and get sticky is that those red cells can't get out. So they can't disgorge the waste. So many of you who have treated liver problems, and it's commonly non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, where you give them liver herbs, which normally will give you quite a quick response. You get an improvement quite quickly when you're using St Mary's or dandelion or biplurum, but you don't get much of a change at all. Then quite often it is endothelium that is the problem, because the liver cell is actually functioning, but it's not able to get the material, the red cells out to actually do the cleaning process. So when that's the case, you need to treat the endothelium. Gut lining we've talked about. Pancreas function, again, obvious. It's loaded with tiny blood vessels and important for its function. The skin, of course. The skin is, in fact, endothelium.
Okay.
Sexual function, talked about, both male and female. Immunity, of course. Waste removal, obviously. Lymphedema, that's a really big one, and it's really common. Chronic infections, people who get infected and clean up and get infected again, it's often because they're unable to get all of the invading organisms out of their system or get them treated because of poor endothelium and just generally poor healing. And of course another one is memory, but that's associated with all the brain ones, and of course a lot of brain function to do with that.
I mean, there's a lot of conditions associated. What are some of the causative factors?
Well, we've done that already, but smoking, pollution, Western diet, or SAD as they are now calling it, standard American or Australian diet, drugs, both prescription and recreational drugs.
Yeah.
Chemotherapy, which is and radiation therapy, which is where I had my interaction with it. Stress, just good old plain stress. Now, a little bit of stress is not going to cause a problem, but prolonged high-level stress will. Pollution and sedentary lifestyle. Of course, exercise works the circulatory system. If it's not being worked, and of course we have a lot more people now sitting on their bum for work and then coming home and doing the same thing. So, and of course there can be genetic influence as well. Some people are more predisposed to this. And it doesn't mean that they can't handle it. It just means they perhaps need to do more to handle it.
Cool, okay.
I'm actually going to show you a little video which everybody at home can look at. What you need to do is search Beamer, B-E-M-E-R, video. And it'll come up on Google, and it's got a green background. And this is actually the live, camera in the gut lining, looking at the microcirculation. So you can see here that we've got some movement here. There are actually a few different versions of this, but you see this one here is not moving at all, hardly. So these are actually kind of big blood vessels. We've got a smaller one there, but all of this should be moving very, very quickly. Now, this device, the Beamer device, is a magnetic field like a blanket that you lie on. It takes half an hour, and you need to lie on it for half an hour every day because it just regresses very quickly. So you can see this starting to move now, but they'll show you a before and afterwards at the end.
Oh, wow. There it goes.
Okay, so, and this should be like a superhighway all the time. And that's quite a big blood vessel that you see there, but some of them, they're very small, single cell going down at a time. So have a look online, everybody, when you get a chance. It gives you a real picture as to what this is really all about.
Okay, so perhaps before moving into the herbal medicine for microcirculation, what kind of diet therapy can you recommend to support microcirculation?
Okay, so look, when you're repairing this, everything's important. So diet, along with the herbal treatment, is really, really important. And I have to thank Kerry Bone for this. He started my interest in this 6-7 years ago. So the first thing is you've got to keep the blood thin. So my favourite is garlic, but also fish oil and bromelains are important here. Fish oil is also very important. It doesn't actually thin the blood. Recent research has told us that it actually just stops the cells from being sticky, so the blood flows better. So whereas for many years we thought fish oil actually thinned the blood. We want a diet that's very high in polyphenols. So green tea and cacao are your primary things here.
Caffeine.
No. Cacao actually is, it's sort of like caffeine, but it's actually the polyphenols rather than the stimulant component there. And it is very, very high in, and we've got I've got something coming up that'll show us this, that you want about 20 grams a day in a smoothie. Mm-hmm. Now, Kerry Bone actually compared an organic powdered cacao to of the chocolates available on the open market. And he found that, in fact, what he thought was the healthy one wasn't as healthy as he thought it was, which I think was green and blacks.
Oh, wow.
That actually Lindt had a higher level of polyphenols in it than the 70% or higher of the Lindt had higher than the green and blacks, which is very interesting. But cacao in a smoothie with some berries, so that's the next thing to talk about. Berries are super high in anthocyanidins. So whether it's blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, strawberries or goji berries, blueberries have the highest, goji berries have a whole bunch of other chemistry with them as well. So all of those are very, very good. Green tea is something that is really important here. So ECGC is in high levels in it, so that's a OPC. So Kerry Bone said 3 to 4 cups. Now they're saying up to 10 cups a day.
Wow, that's a lot
so
of green tea.
It's a lot of green tea. I wouldn't be having it late at night. You're going to keep a lot of people awake. Not everybody, but a lot of people.
Yeah.
So increase dietary intake of all spices and herbs. So turmeric, ginger, garlic, all of those high-tasting things are super high in polyphenols. And dietary nitrates, all your greens, beetroots, and you can have that as part of your diet and or as juices. Look, the supplemental stuff for some people will be fine too, but I actually prefer to get people to get it into their diet and use juices.
I meant to say coffee for the polyphenol, not caffeine, by the way.
Okay, yes. Look, the average person, and I saw a study on this, it must have been about 30 years ago, that said that the average person gets a third of their antioxidant supply from tea and coffee over their lifetime.
Wow.
So that's very, very significant. The problem with tea and coffee is the abuse.
Yes.
Too much tea and coffee will dry you out.
Totally, yes. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I chatted with, when I was telling you about the podcast I did the other day on depression, we were chatting about polyphenols and the relationship there with the caffeine. It's all about moderation.
Absolutely, balance, yeah. So I ran into an article on Nature that listed the polyphenol and antioxidant content of food, and the highest is clove.
Wow.
And the next few are peppermint, star anise, cacao, oregano, celery seed, black chokeberry, which we don't have in Australia, dark chocolate, flax seed, black elderberry, chestnut, common sage, rosemary, spearmint, common thyme, blueberry, blackcurrant, capers, black olive, blueberry, hazelnuts, pecans, soy, flour, plums, green olives, sweet basil, curry, cherries, globe artichoke, blackberry, roasted soybean, milk chocolate, strawberry, red chicory, raspberry, coffee and ginger. So as you can see there, nearly all of that is either herbs or very high tasting food. And the high taste gives you the clue.
Definitely see chai tea in there.
Absolutely. Nutritional supplementation. CoQ10 has to be very high up because of its repair.
How high?
I would think that it is one of the key ones because of its repair to the macrophages that are key in the endothelial cells. Fish oil, resveratrol, quercetin. Quercetin is an OPC. It's one of the most potent OPCs. Vitamin C and E. Folate, so green leafy vegetables is the best source. Bromelins, so pineapple. My favourite thing lately is to have a little bit of a dried pineapple after dinner. It really makes a difference. It's great.
And chew the core because it's the highest in the core.
Yeah. And grapeseed extract. Now, we're going to have quite a bit of a conversation about grapeseed extract versus one of the herbs in a minute. So,
all right, Geoff, let's move on to the fun stuff. Can we talk about the herbs for microcirculation?
Okay. So, what is it in the herbs? In the herbs, we want herbs that are high in OPCs and polyphenols.
So what's an OPC?
So, the proper term is oligomeric procyanidins, and they have a higher antioxidant activity than monomeric procyanidins, and what we normally think of as antioxidants, these are the highest performing of all. So how were they discovered? It's actually a bit of an interesting story, and it comes to our key herb, which is maritime pine. So back in the 1500s, about 1530s, a guy called Jacques Cartier got marooned up an iced over river in North America when they were exploring, and they were feeding, he and his shipmates were feeding on salted meats and hardtack, and of course they got scurvy. And the local Indians told them to boil this bark of a maritime pine tree, and they got rid of their scurvy. So some 400 years later, in the early 1930s, a Professor Jacques Masquelier, another Frenchman, was reading this book written by Cartier about his exploits, and he thought, there must be vitamin C in that bark. And this guy, Masquelier, had a laboratory, and so he actually just checked it out, and there's no vitamin C. So that made him go, well, what was it that solved the scurvy problem? So, and he discovered what he called pycnogenals. So this group of compounds that repaired scurvy, and he then developed a process to extract them, and then we had pycnogenal as a trademarked brand. So this was quite a process, quite difficult to do, and he discovered that the maritime pine had this group of OPCs that were very important. So the main herbs are maritime pine, arjuna, gotu-kola, ginkgo biloba, green tea, bilberry, and hawthorn. So there are a lot of other herbs.
Yeah, okay.
We'll mention a few others, but these are the ones with the most potent OPCs.
Okay.
So maritime pine has evidence that shows a lot of things that surround this. So there's studies that show it reduces lipid peroxidation and oxidation of LDLs. It protects the endothelium from oxidative stress induced by reactive nitrogen species. Excuse me. It protects endothelial cells from activated macrophage-induced glutathione depletion. It induces erythrocyte membrane fluidity. So that's the red blood cell flexibility. It reduces platelet aggregation. It stimulates constitutive endothelial nitrous oxide synthase activity and increases nitrous oxide levels. It reduces LDL cholesterol and indeed increases HDL cholesterol. So, it has powerful anti-inflammatory activity, inhibition of peroxide generation by macrophages. So it's actually influencing the macrophages to not produce the peroxide. It significantly inhibits the formation of pro-inflammatory cytokines, interleukin-1 beta and TNF-alpha. So that's really important. And if we think about what's going on with our current pandemic, maybe there's something here that might assist. We're not allowed to say that, maybe. Has recorded anti-diabetic activity in double-blind placebo-controlled studies, confirmed glucose-lowering effects of the OPCs in maritime pine. Now, a really interesting part is maritime pine versus grapeseed. So, look, grapeseed is being promoted recently as the best form of OPCs, and there's a reason for that. A, it's cheap, and B, it's a waste product from the wine industry. So it's a very cheap thing to produce. However, there's a problem. The reason that maritime pine is so good is that all of the OPCs, and there are 37 different ones, are all very low molecular weight. So let me just clarify that. So molecular weight ranges in OPCs from 162 to 5,500. In maritime pine, the range is from 162 to 1180. In grapeseed, there are only 8 OPCs, and they go from 1180 to 5,000.
Oh, a big difference.
Yeah. So what that means is that the maritime pine is much more easily ingested. It goes through the gut lining much more easily into the bloodstream, and in the bloodstream it goes into the endothelial cell much more easily than the high molecular weight of grapeseed. Now, this does not mean that grapeseed doesn't help, but it just means that maritime pine is more effective.
Okay, what's the dosing for the maritime pine?
So in the form that I use it as a liquid extract, I use about 10 to 15 mil a week.
Great, low dose.
Over 1 in 2, yeah. Now, Kerry Bone, with his research, said he would like to see about 150 milligrams per day of OPCs taken up into the circulatory system to get a repair. And look, he based his stuff on, he actually took a man with a low EGFR who was heading towards dialysis, and on his diet and the use of herbs and lifestyle and diet, recovered this man's EGFR back up to normal range in 18 months. So that was the thing that made me sit up and take notice, 6 or 7 years ago. But the use of one herb, I wouldn't just use one herb. I would be using a mix, and of course the diet and lifestyle things to go along with it.
Of course.
So a bit more history on about the research on maritime pine. So it improves endothelial function in patients with cardiac disease. So it augments endothelium-dependent vasodilation by increasing nitrous oxide production. It protects against endothelial dysfunction that underlies earlier atherosclerotic lesion formation. And it protects against endothelial cells from beta amyloid-induced injury. Now, that last one's very important in terms of Alzheimer's. So now there's a lot more research that needs to be done on this stuff, and it's one of the reasons I think that Pycnogenol, the supplement, is expensive, because they are funding a lot of this research. Okay, which is why we're seeing the research in this particular herb rather than others. So, as I said, there are 37 different OPCs in maritime pine, and that's one of the reasons it's my favourite. I think it's the leading herb that you need to use, but there are a number of others.
So what would be your second herb to use?
Arjuna.
So
Arjuna terminalia, it's an Ayurvedic herb. It's has a very long tradition in Ayurvedic medicine. When I was in Sri Lanka, there's actually an Arjuna tree in the city that is 14 metres around the base. It is a huge, big old tree. So traditionally it's used to repair heart post-infarction. So in the US, I think it was in Bethesda Hospital, I'm not quite sure whether Bethesda or Maryland, about 20 years ago they did some research, and it was 1 gram a day for post-heart attack patients. And there are 4 categories of damage done to the heart post-heart attack, and they're categorised as mild, moderate, heavy and severe. And 3 months of 1 gram a day, which is quite a low dose, everything dropped 1 level, so that mild actually totally disappeared. There was no evidence of previous heart attack. Very significant work. They continued that and found that there was continued improvement over 2 years of using 1 gram a day.
And it's great that you mentioned the dosing there, because I remember when I was making a herbal off of Arjuna, and the reference range is quite big that you can use, and then you said, have a taste of it.
And look, as a herbalist, it's important that you taste herbs and start to understand what's going on. And Arjuna's it's a perfect example of information that you can gain from the taste. So, if you ever get a chance, everybody, have a taste of Arjuna. Don't have a lot, just have a few drops, and you'll find that it's super astringent. But there's a very interesting thing that over a couple of minutes, that astringency drops very, very quickly. Whereas if you have some of the more powerful astringents, like, let's say, Cransbill, it's in your mouth for 20 minutes. You're still puckering after 20 minutes. So it's very interesting to me that it disappears so quickly. That tells me that the astringent components are very small. Most catechins are large particles. And what's another example? Oak bark is another example. And the catechins in oak bark, very large molecule, and normally is not absorbed into the gut. It does get absorbed once it's been exposed to alcohol for more than about 6 months. That's a Queenslander that did the research on this, Greg Jardine, and he developed a product based on that information. But what it does is it changes the external part of the catechin. So instead of all being hydrogen on the edge, some of them change to oxygen, which makes it absorbable. But those astringents tighten the gut lining, which is one of the reasons we use those herbs to repair the gut lining. But those astringents that get absorbed very quickly, such as in Arjuna, do exactly the same thing in the blood vessels. They tone the endothelium. Wonderful. So there's a bit more evidence about that. But they do a lot of other things. Arjuna improves the left ventricle ejection fraction. It's able to shrink enlarged hearts. It stabilises certain types of Arjuna. It actually repairs heart valves. Strong evidence for repairing of endothelial cells. It also increases glutathione, superoxide dismutase, and catalase. Very important. Now, there was one small study done on Arjuna that made me sit up and take notice some years ago. This was done by an American, and he was actually interested in the diuretic potential of Arjuna, but I think it has some other things that we can take from it. So he took some rats that were exposed to hyperbaric hypoxia to a simulated 27,000 feet in a decompression chamber. So now there were a group of rats that were treated with Arjuna and a group of rats that weren't. Single dose, 30 minutes before exposure to the 27,000 feet. Most of the control rats died at 27,000 feet. All of the treated rats survived. Now, why is that? So he was looking for stuff to do with the kidney, but my understanding of what happens with altitude sickness, as we call it, the Americans call it mountain sickness, is that the lowering of blood pressure causes the blood vessel to expand, and so the joins of the endothelial cells begin to fail and they start to leak. And they leak in the wrong area, heart or respiration, and it causes death. So what happened with the Arjuna ones that all survived is that those joints were kept tight and there wasn't the leakage to cause that serious damage. So that's really, really important research. Now, they haven't gone on to tell us. Now, we do know that there's quite a level of OPCs and catechins in Arjuna, but they haven't broken it down quite as well as they have with maritime pine.
Can I just ask, how was it traditionally had? Like, were the Sherpas all drinking this back in the day and that's what they could get up the mountain?
The Sherpas actually drink a relative, so they actually chew the leaves.
They chew it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The leaf of the tree?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So, but this has been used in Ayurveda for thousands of years.
Such a lovely name, Arjuna.
Yeah. Well, a prince in the Bhagavad Gita. So there's quite a story about Arjuna.
All right, let's move on to the next herb.
Go to Gola.
Cool.
Look, fantastic herb with lots and lots of areas that it interacts. It's traditionally known as the healer. I heard of early stories in osteoarthritis where people used to make sandwiches of it in England, and they've been doing this for hundreds of years, and for osteoarthritis too.
Pennywort, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So, and when I was in Sri Lanka, it's a major salad. They use it. They have it every day. But recent research has shown it's very good in venous insufficiency, which gives us a nice little clue that it's doing something with the endothelium, not the muscular part of the blood vessels, but the endothelium. It's good in depression. It has sedative and effects on anxiety. It's anti-epileptic. It's a cognitive enhancing herb. What that means is it's actually anti-acetylcholinesterase. It actually builds up the white matter in nerves and the brain, and it's radioprotective. So, in other words, protects against radiation. There are quite a number of herbs that do that. Withania, Siberian ginseng. Siberian ginseng is the most well researched, but Withania in India, they're researching it now for use with cancer.
So, if someone's to eat go-to cola to try and get the therapeutic dose, how much what do they need to be? This is actually one of the plants that I grew when I first got into naturopathic and herbal medicine at 14. I was growing this and eating it.
Yep.
I knew about the benefits of the health.
Wonderful.
It's certainly one of the ones I would think of for microcirculation. I've used it for ulceration and diabetics, and it's amazing.
Yep.
But yeah, if we're going to eat it, because it is one of those things that, if we can get people to eat their food as medicine, why not?
Yes.
How much you got to eat?
That's a good... Well, it is a bit... unfortunately, the research hasn't been done to find out how much we actually extract when we eat as a salad item.
Okay.
So the extraction process in water and alcohol, we actually know what's in there. But there is a lot of confounding information. So turmeric has become famous because in southern India and Sri Lanka, they wondered why they didn't have the level of cancers that other places in the world have, and they said that turmeric was the reason. But in fact, they also have go-to cola as a salad item pretty much every day, and a bunch of other things that we don't have. So there's a whole lot of other things involved in that. I think they were looking for a simple answer, and I think it was a very important thing to understand that turmeric was important there. But again, there's much more involved in turmeric than just the curcumins. So that's a story for another day. So probably my next favourite, well, actually, it's probably one of the more important ones. So maritime pine, Arjuna, and ginkgo biloba are probably the big three.
Okay.
Ginkgo, because it has measurable effects on its ability to have the endothelium respond. So we know that it improves venous tone. We know that it relaxes the smooth muscle. We know that it's a vasodilator. So if it's a vasodilator, it's not just the veins. Where you get the big effect is in the endothelium, and that flexible effect that allows the red blood cells to go down is what it's actually affecting. It improves cerebral vascular insufficiency. It reduces vascular permeability, which we've talked about, it's not just veins, it's the endothelium that they're actually talking about. So, and this is part of the problem that Western medicine talks about vascular permeability. And I suspect that this is all done simply because they don't have a treatment. So rather than say we've got endothelial leakage, that then we would know what we can do something about that. It's just a universal term that covers all of this. It relaxes smooth muscle. It reduces platelet aggregation, and it decreases systolic and diastolic blood pressure. So if we think about that last one, if it's decreasing systolic and diastolic blood pressure, what's happening? So if we have a look at what we were talking about earlier, where the red cells are not being able to get down these little blood vessels and causing the back pressure, it's actually dealing with that blockage rather than changing the heart's pumping capacity. So, and there are a number of other herbs that do that, and maritime pine's another one of those that does that.
What's the dosing for ginkgo biloba?
It's not that high. I actually think that we can dose higher than they actually say on the bottles. which I think is 20 to 40 mil of a 1-in-1. There's a bit of a problem with ginkgo biloba because a lot of people will go and take a tablet, and a lot of the tablets are not full spectrum.
Ah, okay.
So we don't actually know exactly what they do. Mm-hmm. So ginkgo is quite a complex herb, but the standardisation, so probably the biggest selling tablet is made by Schwab, and it's a 52 to 1 concentration, and they standardise against 4 of the flavonoids. Now, there are a lot more flavonoids, and flavonoids are OPCs, so we know that OPCs are part of what it is, but there are more than 4 of them in there. So they retain those 4, but what else is missing? We don't know, because it goes from 12 grams of herb down to a 240 milligram tablet. So there's 11.75 grams that's not there, and we have no idea of what's not there. This is why, for me, as a traditional herbalist, I like a full spectrum 1-in-1 is the maximum strength. As soon as you go beyond 1-in-1, you're having to heat or use powdered additives to change that concentration.
Okay, great to know. All right. And how about the lucky last, number 5?
Oh, no, there's a couple more.
Oh, there is. Okay.
Couple more.
We're doing top 5.
Green tea. Look, there's so much research being done on green tea because it's easily available. Everybody can have it. It's far more nutritious and doesn't have quite the problems that black tea has. Black tea will still have a benefit, but green tea is higher. It lowers blood pressure. It improves dyslipidemia. It improves insulin sensitivity. Extremely important today with the level of type 2 diabetes around. It has indications that it improves weight loss, significant antioxidant effects, scavenging reactive oxygen species and preventing oxidation of lipids, proteins and DNA. Again, very important.
It's really a wonder food, green tea, that we don't incorporate enough.
Yes, absolutely. It's majorly anti-inflammatory and improves endothelial function, inhibits platelets, and inhibition of smooth muscle cell proliferation and migration. So, it's a very significant herb, but it's one that can be included in the diet very easily. However, some people won't do it, and so when they won't use it, then you can use it in the herbal formula as well.
Is quality a big deal with the green tea as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you want to get a good quality one.
Yes, there's a big difference between a $2 tea bag versus the nice green tea that you get at the tea shops.
Yes.
You weigh it out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Pomegranate. New on the scene for us, but very old herb in the Middle East. It's as active as, in antioxidant terms, as green tea. So its protective effects on the cardiovascular system are significant, and it diminishes oxidative stress, influences positively the macrophage endothelial cell and platelet function. It lowers lipid oxidation, reduces blood glucose, and it has a significant vasodilatory effect, as well as decreasing blood pressure via an inhibition of ACE activity. So again, another very significant herb, and something that we can put in our diet as well as using as a herb in our formulas.
Yes, I mean, I use it for a biofilm breaker and for that
yes,
stuff. But
absolutely.
If you have a look at it, really, it looks like blood. It looks like it's got something to do with
absolutely.
the circulation,
yeah.
the circulatory system.
It's I think, a great addition. So the biofilms are really important, but it also is, it suppresses anaerobic bacteria in the gut, and it promotes aerobes. So it's working a very positive effect on the gut. Bilberry. This is the really old school one.
Yeah.
And we all know it as improving eye health, so and improvement in the...
So quickly.
Yes. So, and why is that? Because it affects the blood flow to the retina. So it's about 25% proanthocyanidins, and it improves capillary permeability and vascular resistance. It reduces microvascular impairment and has a recorded 79% improvement in retinopathy, improvement in varicose veins, significant improvement in lymphatic edema. So again, we haven't talked so much about that, but remember that pretty much we're talking about most of this for endothelium in this cardiovascular area, but it will also apply to lymphedema and the lymphatic system. So bilberry is a wonderful tasting addition to any formula. Will give us significant effects. And look, the last major one we're going to look at is hawthorn. And there are multiple different types of hawthorn. The Chinese have a slightly different type. They're pretty much exactly the same. Now, the WHO monograph says that there are approximately 18.5% of oligomeric procyanidins. I've got another list here, which I'll have a look at in a sec, that Joe Pizzorno did for his book on diabetes, and he says it's 10%. Now, the reason for that disagreement is because herbs, they vary on an annual basis depending on the rainfall and the type of soil and where they're grown, a whole lot of other factors. So this is the thing with herbs, they do vary from season to season. But hawthorn has a fantastic history in chronic congestive heart failure, improves the cardiac output, it regulates arrhythmias, it increases myocardial blood flow, it's antihypertensive, and it's diuretic. So most of us think about it purely for the heart, but it's not just purely for the heart, it's for the entire circulatory system. And it's very similar to Arjuna.
And this is a berry?
You berry or the leaf.
Okay. Yeah, right. And what's the dosing that you give for the hawthorn in the extract, herbal extract?
Look, in all of these, I tend, because this is not something we're going to fix overnight, I don't put at the top end, with the exception of maritime pine. So I put them in mid to lower because I want to get quite a number of them in there, and I'll swap them around. So I might have Arjuna for a while and I'll swap over to hawthorn. But hawthorn I keep a little bit lower dose because it does increase the heart output. Arjuna does as well, but it seems to be more modulatory than hawthorn. That's an amazing thing with hawthorn. I use it in other areas too where I really need that increased output. So, for example, someone who has hypothyroid and gets tachycardia. So what happens with tachycardia is the heart starts fluttering and pumping small pumps rapidly, up to 220 beats a minute, but that's not a full pump. And so I have it started with one client, but I have a few clients whose heartbeat, who have tachycardia, and the rescue is to use bugleweed, which suppresses the thyroid, hawthorn, which increases the heart stroke, and what that does is it has to slow down in order to have a big stroke. So it immediately begins slowing the heart to make that happen. And heartsease. So those two herbs are to actually increase the stroke of the heart, the depth of the stroke of the heart, which actually has the effect of slowing it down from the tachycardia. So there are very important things to do with each of these herbs. But there are many others to consider.
When using herbs for microcirculation, are there other kind of synergy herbs that you want to incorporate in the formula to sort of counteract the balance of the microcirculation system? So obviously, depending on what you're treating, it's
absolutely
going to vary with that. But are there any particular synergistic herbs that you always use?
It depends on what's going on. So, for example, if you've got someone with a lot of varicosities, I'd be using horse chestnut.
Okay.
Because it has evidence of actually not only with the endothelium, but actually improving the vein walls of those bigger blood vessels. But you combine the two, absolutely. But you can treat whatever else is going on as well. And so, but I find that nearly anything that you treat has a microcirculation component. So there's a need to put this in at the same time, along with whatever else you're treating. So, and this is a problem that, so if you just are treating symptomatically, you're going to ignore things like this. And it's a problem sometimes with some practitioners who don't look beyond let's take erectile dysfunction. It's a simple one. So yes, you can get a result by using Korean ginseng and horny goatweed and rhodiola or withania and a kidney herb. Yes, you'll get an erection from that, but you have to use it all the time. You won't repair what's going on inside. So the real problem is the microcirculation.
So what's the duration for the...
How long's a piece of string?
Yeah.
So old school says for every year that something's been around, it takes a month to 2 months to repair. So if someone's 50, how long have they been damaging their endothelium?
So this is a great sort of herb to keep in a formula for the long-term repair while working on other things that might be more acute and
exactly.
where you need to have a primary focus.
Yes. Okay. So, of course, it can be a major thing. So if you've got someone in front of you who has retinopathy or kidney damage, EGFR's low, or a major liver thing, like non-alcoholic fatty liver, or you can treat those directly with this. But you've got, let's think of something else that's going on. So you're treating permeable gut. So on top of what you would normally do to treat that, also treat the microcirculation, because it is the microcirculation that is behind the nutritional supply and the waste removal that will improve the gut function. So, and when you're doing this, it's systemic too. It's not just the one area. So you put him, and I don't know about you, but the people I've seen today, and nothing's simple. You don't get people coming in with one problem. They come in with a train wreck of all sorts of stuff. Now, if you ask enough questions, you'll often find that there are just one or two things that are behind all of that. And to me, that's the most important thing to do, to find out the core reasons and treat the core reasons. And 9 times out of 10, microcirculation is one of those.
Wow. Okay, so you've given us a whole depth of information around the microcirculation, what's the role in the body and the herbs. Is there any other pearls of wisdom you want to leave us with today? It's a big topic.
It is a big topic. Look, there are a lot of other herbs that have effects in this area. So in Western herbal medicine, a few of them are horse chestnut, prickly ash, motherwort, oak bark, butcher's broom, rosemary and heartsease, TCM, Korean ginseng, dan shen, polygonum, Panax noto ginseng, and he shu wa wu. Okay, you can pronounce that better than I can. And there are many more than that. Anything with polyphenols in it and OPCs in it is going to have an effect. And so one in Western herbal medicine that is not on my little list here is saffron. Saffron is coming up with some really good results in microcirculation. But of course we think about it for depression and mood and those sorts of things. But it's showing up as also having a microcirculatory effect.
I love saffron. And what about
Bacopa? I don't really know how powerful it is. I think it has a little bit of an effect, but because it's so effective in the rebuilding the nerves and effects on the thyroid, its total effects are there. And so I often use it. Its ability to rebuild white matter is incredible. It's something that you could consider, but off the top of my head, I can't remember how much polyphenol it has in it.
Okay. So it's a good synergy herb for all the brain conditions that we're looking at.
Absolutely. And there's a few of those, that, whether it's lemon balm or go-to Gola is the one that has evidence for endothelial dysfunction.
Okay. All right, Geoff, well, thank you so much for letting us pick your brain on the microcirculation system. For our listeners that want to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
Vitawell.com.au.
Vitawell.com.au. And Geoff's been the herbal rep for herbal extract for?
Well, off and on for since 2014. Yeah. I had a little hiatus in Sri Lanka building an oncology centre there.
Oh, wow.
But
having got 2 Gola salads.
Absolutely. And curry for breakfast, lunch and dinner.
Greenhouses on point there.
Yeah.
Okay, Geoff, is there anything else you want to finish up with for us today on microcirculation? Look,
there are a few things. Number one, think root cause. Number two, dosage is really important. So there are different brands of herbs on the market. Traditionally, 1-in-1s is the aim always. Because it will deliver more phytonutrients, and because we have such a problem with train wrecks, as we discussed earlier, the ability to get more into the bottle is the most important thing. Don't restrict the dosage to fit into a predetermined volume. That is, if you don't try and make it just 100 ml, if you need 150 ml to get the herbs in that you feel are required for this patient, do 150 ml a week. It's not, you don't have to fit them into just 100 ml. So root cause is the key thing though, because so many things have endothelial dysfunction as the root cause, and just treating the symptoms will only get temporary relief, and it will probably come back. So long-term healing will only come when you've addressed the root cause. Herbs will heal, diet and lifestyle will maintain it, and permanent repair will take time. Give it time.
That's a great point.
And educate your people to give time.
Well, thanks again, Geoff, for joining us. I'm certainly going to have to re-listen to this podcast to soak it all in. You've given us a lot of depth on the chemistry behind the microcirculation system, so thanks again.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening.
I have been a practitioner of naturopathic and Chinese medicine for over a decade. I have a master's degree of health science and I am an academic lecturer at Australia's leading natural medicine college. I am available worldwide online for bookings. Simply go to sandyrosshealth.com.